and Amravati Health and Education. My organization works with patients and patient groups, helping them to understand their disease condition and work with healthcare providers as well as policymakers to understand the gaps in the system and to find solutions for managing those gaps. One of our initiatives is in rare and genetic disorders. And today our topic for discussion is understanding neurofibromatosis type 1 and the early signs, neurological impacts, and long-term management. This condition happens in children at an early age and and has very specific signs and symptoms that can be detected early by a trained physician. With us today, joining us as an expert, it is my honor and pleasure to welcome and introduce Dr. Shefali Gulati. And she is an accomplished physician. She is compassionate. She has been passionate about children and neurological conditions and has worked in various areas. She represents the All India Institute of Medical Sciences and is a professor there. Apart from various accolades and positions in various organizations. She has 485 publications, including in JAMA Pediatrics, with a lot of high index scores and 3% top global publications, over almost 10,000 citations and 625 abstracts. Her areas of interest are autism, epilepsy, dietary therapies, neuromuscular disorders, cerebral palsy, and other NDDs, mostly around neurorehabilitation, including neuromodulation. She has received several awards, both national as well as international, and including the 2024 National Academy of Medical Sciences Women in Medicine Award, the American Academy of Neurology, A.B. Backer Teacher Recognition Award, National Senior Women Bioscientist Award, and by DBT in 2021-22, National Award for Outstanding Efforts in Science and Technology Communication by Department of Science and Technology, February 2020, the Sheila Wallace Award as the first Indian recipient in 2014, and a fellowship award by the Faculty of Medicine, McGill University, and ICNA 2010. So thank you so much for joining us, ma'am. And we look forward to listening to you and hearing your expertise on how to manage this condition, especially since it is a extremely complicated area and not many physicians or scientists are aware. We know that in the context of India, we have 13 centers of excellence to be able to treat and manage children with rare and genetic disorders. But this particular condition does not have the expertise in all the centers of excellence. Many medical colleges are also just learning about the condition and the new treatment modalities that are available. So we look forward to your guidance and your expertise on how to navigate this particular condition. How can physicians diagnose? What can parents and next of kin of children diagnosed with this condition should be doing, and who should they be reporting to, and how should they navigate their life journey? Because from what I understand, the initial phases is just waiting and watching to see whether any complications develop, and it puts the parents into very high stress. So over to you, ma'am, to listen from you, from your kind expertise.
Thank you, Dr. Ratna, and thank you, Ria, and thanks for the opportunity. So in the next 20-25 minutes, we will just go through what NF1 is. That's the topic Ria gave, right? At instruction of Dr. Ratna, understanding NF1, early signs, neurological impacts, and long-term management. Thank you very much for your kind introduction and opportunity. So I thought let me just go through that. What is the introduction, the molecular genetics, trying to understand the clinical manifestations and the specific phenotypes, the diagnostic criteria, broadly surveillance recommendations, treatment options, some take-home messages. See, their data which has been shown to flag, each slide has only one message, so we don't have to be bogged down by the data, but data is just to give the emphasis that what we are talking about has some evidence to it, so that we just pick up one line per slide, but the figures behind that is just to give an emphasis that they have some meaning. So neurofibromatosis is one of the phacomatoses, and they are basically notable for the dysplastic nature and the tendency to form tumors in various organs, particularly the nervous system. So there are three distinct kinds like NF1, NF2, and schwannomatosis. And the most common variant of NF1 is the NF1, which is accounting for 96% of the cases. NF2 accounts for 3% of the total cases. And schwannomatosis has an overlapping features and has a rare with NF2 and has a rare occurrence. They are caused by mutation of specific genes, often inherited. Those spontaneous mutations can also occur, which we will see. NF1 is an autosomal dominant disorder with approximately a prevalence of 1 in 2,600 to 3,000 children, people, and it has shows an extreme phenotypic heterogeneity. And as most of the autosomal dominant disorders have, it has an incomplete penetrance, and it is characterized by multi-system tumors, particularly neurofibroma, and they generally evolve over time, and the life expectancy ultimately gets reduced by around 8 to 21 years. Generally, 50% of the cases are familial and 50% are de novo. And the de novo mutations are primarily from the paternally derived chromosomes. It is due to the pathogenic variants in the NF1 gene, which is located in the chromosome 17q. That is why 17th May is that day of the neurofibromatosis. NF1 gene product is neurofibromin, which belongs to the GTPase activating proteins gap, and it is an important. Neurofibromin plays an important role in cellular signaling and cellular proliferation. And mutation in this NF1 gene causes lack of neurofibrin, which activates the RAS pathway. As we can see, the RAS pathway gets activated, so we need to have cellular proliferation and tumor formation, which is seen. There are more than 3,000 different germline mutations which have been identified, and there are certain different mutations associated with a different phenotype. So for example, like biallelic NF1 inactivation causes Laffer-Caffioli spots and neurofibromatosis, and mutation in TP53 causes malignant peripheral sheath tumor. Just for us to understand that you have certain specific genotype phenotype correlations as well. And you may have, variable phenotype features vary and variable over a period of time in one's life. They evolve. So it may be difficult to diagnose early. Things may come up. So they generally you have Caffioli macules, and you have axillary or inguinal freckles, or you may have Lisch nodules. And, we have to understand that, it become across the age span, like you may have the Caffioli macules earlier, and you may also have some orbital dysplasia, tibial dysplasia, pseudoarthrosis, and plexiform neurofibromatosis coming earlier. But then otherwise in the middle of the, middle of childhood, and all, then you will start having more things. So you have learning disabilities, and then you may have ADHD, ASD, speech delays, optic nerve glioma, then brainstem glioma. You may have freckles coming up, Lisch nodules, scoliosis coming up, and you may be having both dysplastic, non-dysplastic. You may have neurofibromas which come up. And, later on in adulthood, you may have malignant peripheral nerve sheath tumor, breast cancer, and high-grade gliomas also coming up. So at a different age span, you may have different manifestations. So one was that different phenotypes was with the certain genotypes, which were there, as we saw that you have certain genotypes associated with some phenotypes, and also that they evolve over a time of a person's lifespan. Caffioli spots, the macules, they account 15% of the general population have 1 to 3 of the Caffioli macules. And having 6 or more of these Caffioli macules is suggestive of NF1. They may be two kinds. They may be clear, which are distinct from the surrounding skin. There is a lot of brownish, as you can see here, and they are the typical. And you may also have atypical, which are irregularly shaped with indistinct irregular margins. You may also, it is not pathognomic of NF1, but you may have certain other conditions where it may be associated. But there are certain studies in which they have seen patients of Caffioli macules and followed them up, and they have seen that those having more than 6 Caffioli macules were suggestive of NF1. That is why this figure has come up upstairs. And also, higher the number of Caffioli macules, the higher the chances of having NF1. And also association of axillary or inguinal frectin, which can be in 70% plus. lesion nodules can be around in 15 to 20%. Pseudoarthrosis is less than 5%. And you may also have plexiform neurofibromatosis, which will be around 7 to 10%. So, all these associated ones, obviously with Kaplan-Meier, then you know that it is looking like NF1. And what are these basically? The freckles, what they are basically are smaller than the capillary macules, and they are usually in clusters in the skin folds rather than randomly, and they occur in axillary and inguinal areas, and they're generally not present at birth and come later on at 3 to 5 years. You can see here, and Leishman nodules are basically raised tan-colored melanocytic hematomas of the iris, a specific finding of NF1, which you can see, and they do not affect the vision, and the lesions are detected in less than 10% of children younger than 6, but more than 90% in the older age group. And they appear generally before the neurofibromas come up. So you will like to do eye screening for these children. Then you may have various bone abnormalities in NF1, which can be scoliosis in 10 to 20% of 25% of patients. I mentioned to you earlier that you may have either dystrophic or non-dystrophic, two types of scoliosis, and it commonly involves the thoracic spine. You may also have certain cervical spine abnormalities like cervical kyphosis, subaxial dislocation, subluxation, or atlantoaxial instability. And you may also have long bone dysplasias, and it is the most common cause of long bone pseudoarthrosis, accounted for 50 to 80% of the cases. And 75% of pseudoarthrosis of tibia has NF1. So, you can understand that you have to keep all this in mind, and even the anterolateral bowing and tibial dysplasia may be in 5%. So that is something which has to be kept in mind. But we know mostly NF1 because of the hyperpigmentation of the capillary macules, as well as the malignancies and the other neoplasm, which may be benign. Also, you have this biallelic NF1 inactivation, and the most common benign tumor, which we all know, is neurofibromas. But you may have, tumor formations. Others could be also the astrocytomas, neurofibromas in the Schwann cells, the interstitial cells of Kajal will have the tumor. You may have Glomus tumor, pheochromocytoma, and malignant peripheral nerve sheath tumor. So you may have different kinds of tumors as well. So although we always think about neurofibromatosis, yes, and malignant peripheral nerve sheath tumor rarely in the situation. Other thing is that, there's something important to see, that you have a neurofibromas, they're seeing the prevalence of these conditions. So neurofibromas, fibromas were the most common neoplasm, which was in 41.4%, followed by gliomas with around 20%, that is 18.4 in this study, and followed by malignant peripheral nerve sheath tumor in 15.1%. And patients with NF1 develop neoplasms more frequently than the general population, and the odds ratio was 9.5. That's pretty high. And this is another study which was important. This one was to see, they had 524 NF1 patients. They were followed up, and they found 56 tumors were diagnosed in 53 patients aged less than 20 years. And the childhood cancer incidence significantly was higher than that in the general population, with the standardized incidence ratio. You give a standardized incidence ratio in the observed and expected malignancies in cases of neoplasm. So the standardized incidence ratio was of 35.6%. So that is pretty high. And out of the 56 tumors seen in these 53 patients, 22 were optic pathway gliomas. Optic pathway gliomas account for 70% of all the CNS tumors, while the second being the brainstem glioma. Yeah, it's nearly always grade 1 pilocytic astrocytoma, frequently develops before the age of 7 years. And the course of NF1 associated with optic pathway glioma is more favorable than the sporadic cases. And they're mostly asymptomatic, and less than half may require treatment. And the clinical course is unpredictable. Those with anterior locations have a better prognosis. Chiasmal and post-chiasmal gliomas are usually less favorable because of the location. In the chiasmal, we have really problems can be there. The treatment is controversial, but in NF1, generally the observation and follow-up is appropriate for tumors that involve the optic nerve, until and unless there is evidence of either the extension into the orbital canal or it's threatening the vision because of its location shape. So that has to be kept in mind. Usually wait and watch and follow up. But firstly and importantly, the clinicians as well have to know that you have to keep monitoring these things. And then coming to neurofibromas, they are the benign peripheral nerve sheath tumors that are mixture of Schwann cells, fibroblasts, perineural cells, and mast cells. You may have the cutaneous neurofibromas, which are the most common. They are soft, fleshy, sessile, or pedunculated, and lesions appear to be, begin to appear just before or during adolescence. You remember we saw that different ages you had different things seen, and the capillary was seen earlier, and later on you could even have malignant peripheral nerve sheath tumor and breast cancer, etc. So in between was coming the optic nerve sheath tumors and then the neurofibromas. So the other is a plexiform neurofibroma, which see this is looking so ghastly, which it's located superficially and often associated with overgrowth of skin and soft tissue, usually congenital, and tend to grow rapidly, mostly during childhood. Or you may also have nodular neurofibroma. So you can see like this, which you can see in this picture, which are discrete lesions grows under the skin as firm rubbery masses and compress the surrounding structures. So, usually you see these, this can be sometimes, and you may also have these. Now, neurodevelopmental disorders, which is my basically forte of work and research overall, I did take a talk on neurodevelopment disorders associated with the NF1 last year on 17th May when we had this NF1 program. In that, various types of neurodevelopment disorders can occur with NF, neurofibromatosis, and cognitive deficits, learning disabilities, and autism spectrum disorder has a higher frequency. See, we have to know, then only we will look for them. Otherwise, these children will do poorly in school, and then, we'll not be able to know. So in these situations, when you have associations, you don't have to wait for their after effects to happen. We have to pick them up early, screen them up early, so that we are rehabilitating them and, providing them support from the beginning so that they can reach their maximum potential, and we don't have to wait for them to be a poor school achiever. IQ scores are generally 5 to 10 points lower in children with NF1 compared to general population, and SLD occurs, specific learning disability has been noticed in up to 2/3 of them, and ADHD in about 30 to 40%. There is a generally lack of understanding why this pathogenesis under the pathogenesis of this. And regarding autism, as I remember that in the CDC figures in which they had seen at 8 years of age when they were seeing all the children with autism, I think 1 in 588 of autism children had NF1. So from that point of view, if you just try to see. So entities in this, what is happening at the cellular level? NF1 encodes for neurofibromin, which we talked about, which is a multi-domain cytoplasmic protein expressed in the oligodendrocytes, Schwann cells, and neurons. And the NF1 protein, the neurofibromin, acts as a brake on the cellular growth, which we have seen in that previous flow chart. And it regulates the protein expression, the RAS protein, and plays a key role in signal transduction involving in synaptic plasticity, memorizing, and learning. So in animal models with NF1 knockout have shown the excessive RAS activity and increased GABAergic activity, and there are cognitive defects which have been there. So, you have impaired myelination, neurotransmitter imbalance, and impaired long-term potentiations all lead to various kinds of neurodevelopmental conditions in these children. So this was a nationwide population-based study. And in this 103 adults with NF1 and 38 Asian gender match NF3 children were seen. Adults were seen, and the adults with NF1 showed a significant moderate to severe impairment in intelligence, visual short-term memory, immediate visual spatial recall, sustained attention, and executive function. So the intelligence, memory, the attention, and executive functions all were, significantly impaired compared to those who did not have NF1. So what about, these issues which happen in cognition and learning? 50 to 80% of individuals with NF1 will have learning difficulties. And they could be either visual spatial defects, executive dysfunction, you may have attention problems. As I mentioned, 40 to 50% had ADHD, right? So language-based SLDs will fall in 65%. You may have academic underachievement, because of all these features which are there, and they may be contributing. regarding autism, this is a single gene condition with a high autism prevalence, and it's a genetic model for understanding the neurobiological mechanism of autism. And a recent meta-analysis has shown a large effect size of 0.91 of autistic behaviors in parent-rated trait-based questionnaires. Based on the parent questionnaires, they found that 0.9 was the effect size of having, parents of children with NF1 when they were asked about the autism-related questions. And based on diagnostic instruments, the prevalence has been of autism in NF1 has been from 11% to 26%. And from the other side, which I told you, in autism, 1 in 588 was shown in the CDC data to be having NF1. 588 autism, and one of them had NF1. So understanding the artistic phenotype is going to be important in the background. Otherwise, we will not be able to, manage them completely. So that is something very important. So you need to screen and look for them and diagnose them early. And overall, you may also have some vasculopathy, which is ranged from 2 to 5%, which could be the renal artery stenosis, cervical vasculopathy, or abnormalities in the abdominal aorta. So that may produce stroke or Moya kind of thing, or vascular stenosis and occlusion. And then NF1 has vascularity affects small, medium, and large, all kinds of vessels. So basically, that is because, you have this neurofibromin was lost, then you have the MACP pathway, which is activated, the abnormal vascular wall proliferation, intimal hyperplasia, and medial thinning. So you have vessel narrowing. So those vasculopathy is important to be seen. So as I mentioned to you earlier, you may have various age-specific symptoms, which come to recap. When the initially, remember, in the horizontal one, we could see, and there is a birth to 2 years, you have CAF-Leulet, you have pseudoarthrosis, sphenoid wing dysplasia, optic nerve gliomas, plexiform neurofibromas rarely. 2 to 6 years, you may have axillary or inguinal freckling, Lisch nodules coming up, and they were coming up before the neurofibromas. As I mentioned, it doesn't usually affect the vision. And the optic pathway gliomas, yes, the chiasmatic and the post-chiasmatic can have some vision problems, and other CNS tumors, learning disability, speech delay, plexiform neurofibromatosis, 6 to 10 years, learning disability, ADHD, scoliosis, both dystrophic and non-dystrophic, plexiform neurofibroma, increased risk of other cancers, and headaches. In adolescence, you may again have more neurofibromas, you may have malignant transformation of pre-existing plexiform neurofibromatosis, you may have malignant peripheral nerve sheath tumor, hypertension coming out because of vasculopathy having taken place. And in adulthood, you may have increasing number of cutaneous and subcutaneous neurofibromas, the malignant peripheral nerve sheath tumors, hypertension due to vasculopathy, which is increasing. So this is something which is important, and most of the malignant transformations occur in the adolescence and adulthood. There are certain distinctive phenotypes. The typical features of NF1 may be restricted to one part of body. Parents are not unaffected. It results from a post-conceptional mutation at the NF1 gene, leading to a somatic mosaicism in this case. And more serious complications of NF1, like optic gliomas, plexiform neurofibromas, and learning disabilities, are common with this segmental. You can see this how only in one particular segment it is there. So this has been described also. You have also another phenotype described like the NF1 Noonan syndrome, in which you have NF1 patients having features of Noonan syndrome, like you have ocular hypertelorism, down slanting palpebral fissures, lucid ears, web neck, and pulmonary stenosis. It is seen in 12% of NF1 patients, and it can be because of constitutional mutations in the NF1 gene. And because of mutations in the Noonan syndrome and NF1 code for different proteins which are involved in the RAS signaling pathway. So you have a shared kind of a phenotype in this situation. But you may have certain NF1 mimickers. You need to see that certain conditions can mimic NF1 and should be seen both clinically and histopathologically, which are there. But that is only what I need you to know, that there can be some mimickers too. Coming to the radiological findings, frequently detected in person with NF1, you have the bright spots, which are called UBO earlier, now called FASI. They may be increased brain volume. These bright spots are focal areas of hyperintensity in the T2 weighted sequences and commonly seen in basal ganglia, cerebellum, brainstem, and subcortical white matter. These conditions are not pre-malignant, and they have just shown that cognitive function are poor in patients who have these bright spots too. So that is what has been seen as association. As we know, the diagnosis is basically present on the clinical features and the lesions which are there. The genetic testing in children with partial clinical features may be helpful. Children with the NF1 should be evaluated by a multidisciplinary team, which we can see because so many systems are involved. So if you're not going to be seeing holistically, if you do not see the eye, you do not see for the arteries, you're not seeing for the bones, you are just thinking on the skin and grossly any lesion in the brain, that doesn't suffice. So it has to be seen in a multidisciplinary manner, and there is an international consensus on the neurofibromatosis, diagnostic criteria, INFDC, revised diagnostic criteria for NF type 1 and Legius syndrome, which was published in 2021, in which you have, many criterias, this one was that 6 or more capholae over 5 millimeter in the greatest diameter, which I mentioned to you that more than 6 was the thing, and how we came to it. So that's something important to see. But if you have nodular and plexiform neurofibromas are associated with increased morbidity and mortality and high risk of malignant transformation is there. And there are certain genotype-phenotype correlations one has to just keep in mind. Regarding treatment, screening recommendations, treatment and management options, it is important that there is a European reference network on genetic tumor risk syndromes. And in January 2023, this was an article which has suggested the surveillance guidelines for individuals with NF1. And, they have said that if you have an optic nerve pathway glioma and optic pathway glioma, then you have to be screening them clearly. And then you have to see, because of that, you will initially be having a yearly screening, which will be there, has to be done. And initially, you may like to do in 1 to 3 at least yearly, and 4 whenever visible, and then yearly. So similarly, for every visit you need to see for gliomas, neurofibromas, and plexiform neurofibroma, something important to be seen. And you may like to do any pheochromocytoma, you may need a biochemical screening to be done, and you may like to do a visual inspection for various other tumors. But for the gastrointestinal one, you may like to do, in case there is any symptoms there, you do a clinical examination, history taking, yes, for every visit. You may need an MRI or a CT, depending if the patient has some clinical suspicion of some symptoms. So, regarding it, clinical assessment of optic pathway glioma should begin immediately after the diagnosis of NF1, and baseline assessment has to be done, and they has to be done by a trained pediatric ophthalmology or neuro-ophthalmologist for children until the age of 8 years without known glioma of the optic pathway. Ophthalmic, ophthalmological assessment is recommended and should be repeated at least every year and every 6 months if feasible, and more than 8 years. You are those who don't have a optic pathway glioma, annual screening has to be done thereon. Imaging of the for the optic pathway glioma, MRI should be performed, if it is suggestive in children older than 2 years, with repeated inconclusive or unreliable ophthalmological evaluations. You may like to do it MRI to be seen. So they are for plexiform neurofibroma also. Similarly, there are certain recommendations that clinical evaluations and all has to be put on regularly. So everything has been detailed, so it's all optimized, and you need to have a multidisciplinary team. And regarding the, you have to see for the management strategies of NFA related, all these neurofibromas and all, and you may have, if they are symptomatic, and you, depending if it's causing an outcome compromise, whether there's progression, whether it's causing disfigurement, whether it's causing pain, and if it's asymptomatic, it's you just observe and do an annual imaging in that situation. But if they are progressing and you have to have a multidisciplinary team who like to see the head and neck. Maybe you need an ophthalmologist and ENT. If you have a chest, you may like to have a general surgeon and pulmonologist and cardiac. It is abdomen, GI surgery, and gastrointestinal and urology has to come up. extremities, orthopedics have to come up. And if you have the spinal cord, the neurosurgery and neurology have to come up. So a multidisciplinary team has to see, and that's how carry on the management. And regarding the therapeutic options, the mutations of the neurofibromin in NF1, it causes dysregulated RAS signaling. And so, you have this, what you can do is, there you may have drugs which can, you have teperfinib, which acts here, and you may have, you have selumetinib, which is acting as here at MEC. Then, you also have this mTOR, you can be everolimus, which affects there. Then you have a sirolimus affecting here. So they are sites where the drugs can be done. So this selumetinib was in children with inoperable neurofibromas. It's an open label phase 2 trial study, which was published in New England Journal of Medicine in 2020 in 50 children, out of which 34 patients had a confirmed partial response and 28 had a sort of a durable response lasting more than 1 year. And the median time for initial response for 8 cycles and the median time for best response for 16 cycles. So 1 out of 5 with trichosmy at baseline was able to be decannulated after 12 cycles owing to the shrinkage. And obviously we can understand that the quality of life and pain has significantly improved. So the novel treatments which are there, studies are there with imatinib, tefidinarib, pirfenidone, sirolimus, and interferon alpha 2B, which have got only marginal benefits. The revolution came only in 2020 with the inhibition of selumetinib, which is the first effective medical targeted therapy for these neurofibromas. So FDA has approved this the trade name which was there was Kosilgo for children aged 2 years with neurofibroma type 1 and inoperable and symptomatic plexiform neurofibromatosis in June 2020. There is another paper in which was on the efficacy and safety of selumetinib. And there, if it was seen, there were 5 studies which could be seen in this meta-analysis in which 126 patients were seen. And the pooled, objective response rates, there was 73.8%. And the disease control response rates was 92.5%. And 2 most important adverse effects was diarrhea in 63.8% and increased creatine kinase level in 63.3%. So these are the various studies of which were included in this meta-analysis, and the response rates have been around, from 71, 68, 72, and 61% in these patients. So FDA approved selumetinib in 2020 for pediatric patients 2 years of age and older with an NF type 1 who were symptomatic and had inoperable neurofibromas. Toxicity, as I mentioned to you, was mostly mild and reversible adverse events were seen and was asymptomatic increase in creatine kinase, acneiform or maculopapular rash, paronychia, gastrointestinal problems like diarrhea, nausea, and vomiting. Other options are basically which are cabozantinib, miradibinib, tramitinib, and binimetinib, which are also there, which are options which are under investigation and studies. So this was miradibinib is an investigation in highly selective potent allosteric CNS penetrant MEK1 and 2 inhibitor, and it's a orally administered drug, and primary outcome of more than 20% reduction of the target plexiform neurovolume from the baseline after the 24 treatment phase was complete. And the median target plexiform neurofibroma volumetric best response was 41%, and in children 42%. So similar response. So on February 11th, 2025, the FDA has approved miradibinib for adult and pediatric patients 2 years of age and older with NF1 who have symptomatic plexiform neurofibromas not amenable to complete resection. So this is something latest which has come this year. So, but the holistic management, to conclude, holistic management is the key, which includes, having a routine surveillance and monitoring, educational and support, management of tumors, genetic counseling, and family planning and counseling for them for the next pregnancy and prenatal diagnosis. Then multidisciplinary team, the primary care provider, a pediatric neurologist, oncologist, ophthalmologist, dermatologist, orthopedician. You may need a GI or a pulmonary or a urologist, depending if you have that part. Visions and transitional care to adulthood is something important for these children. So NF1, to conclude, is a multisystem genetic disorder with predisposition to multiple tumors, and clinical manifestation evolve over time, which we have seen from Caffioli spots in the early part to malignant transformation more so in the adulthood. And follow-up is needed to establish the diagnosis and tumor surveillance, and treatment options include inhibition of the RAS and MEK and tyrosine kinase inhibition. Currently, selumetinib and miradebanib are the licensed drugs for symptomatic and inoperable plexiform neurofibromatosis. Thank you so much for patient listening. This is AIMS, where I belong to, and my team.
So
Happy to
there
answer
are,
any questions.
thank you. I hope I'm audible. So there are a few questions. You said 50% are autosomal dominant and 50% are de novo. So if one child in a family has NF1, what is the possibility of maybe another sibling having it?
So I'm just saying, in that situation, we have to see, you'll have to see if it's there, it's coming or not. You will be seeing parents, right? When you are assessing. So you'll come to know that it is behaving in an autism dominant way or not. In that will be different. So you'll have to first see whether it's a autosomal dominant, then you will have that 50% right. But if you do not have, if it's a de novo mutation, when you've seen after examining the patient's parents, because whenever we do, even clinically, we try to see and examine, right? And otherwise, then obviously, that will be correct. It'll be very much different. In that way, that you will not have a high risk, huh?
So in
De novo, you won't have. Yeah, please. Yeah.
Yeah, no, the reason why I ask is when we work with patients with rare diseases or parents of children with rare diseases, very often we find that they have multiple, children with similar disorders because they are not aware
Yeah.
that it gets
Yeah.
transmitted, and sometimes it skips a sibling. So there are certain conditions in which one child has it and the other child does not have it. So what is the possibility here in this? I mean, if parents ask, suppose I'm not aware and there is already a pregnancy, what are the chances that the second child might also have it?
See, you will have to see, if you have not seen anything, then obviously you'll have to give the classical autosomal dominant one. But
Yeah.
why I was saying was, regardless of the population, 50% are familial and 50% are de novo, and they are primarily coming on the paternal one, which they have shown in studies. And this one, I didn't mention the last line. I showed the slide for the last. They have also shown one thing, that at 1 year of age, right, the sporadic cases were 50%.
Yeah.
But by 8 years of age, the sporadic was in this study 97%. So sporadic may be higher also. So that's what, so I not to add confusion, I did not mention that. So that means you will have to individualize when you are having. See, if the mother is not pregnant, you would have obviously seen, and then you take a family history, and then you see, and you come to know. So that will give you guidance about it. But if it's looking that it's coming, then autosomal dominant, then you have that 50% thing, yes. But it has an incomplete penetration, and it has a phenotypic heterogeneity. Sometimes what happens that your parents might be mildly symptomatic, so they might have even ignored it, something like that. And then child they got it later on in life, but the child is manifesting earlier, so they both heterogeneity could be there. So what you were saying, I understand, and that is very important for all rare disease, because we have to be very careful that we are not we don't have more children of the same problem in the same family. It's a failure of the medical fraternity in that situation.
Yes, ma'am. And so a follow-up question to that is, since this condition requires multi-speciality, a whole team to be able to manage. If people are coming from primary care, what can be done, and how can we train people to be able to recognize? Because usually spots on children are considered normal and nobody ever bothers. So when should people be alerted that these spots might not be normal and that they need to be investigated?
I think they should, the primary, we need to, see, there are two ways of advancing science. There is a base of the pyramid and the apex of the pyramid. Now, having this, all the Seluminative and the other one coming up now, the engine in the 2025, this is the apex is going up, but then it has to go to the community, right? The base has to go, has to be expanded as well. So what happens is, in that situation, you have to empower the clinicians to pick up and for actually important message for parents, if they are not to ignore anything. Sometimes some of them may be having some angiomas may be there. I mean, it's not for neurofibrosis, something else. They might
Yeah.
think, no, it's just a birthmark, just pass it off. So I think it's better for them to show to a
Doctor. Yeah.
pediatrician, doctor. So pediatrician must be there in any periphery, right? Even if you don't have a pediatric neurologist or any other specialist, so that person will be able to see. Because if there is a angioma, you may be having something coming like something in the brain also. You may have a Sturge-Weber syndrome, and the child may later on have any seizures or something, or like that. Here it is hyperpigmented macule. You may have hypopigmented macule, like in tuberous sclerosis. So in that situation, the child may end up having seizures. In that, you have some adenoma sebaceum, which just look like something similar to those pimples, similar like crudely for the lame people. So they say, no, he just had pimples. But then you see, yeah, it is adenoma sebaceum. Parents have only that, and the child has ash leaf macules, and then you have a seizure, and then you have something. So it's important that parents should be told that you should not just take it as innocuous. You pointed out, but many times the child is not disrobed and seen. So you have to ask, like we always ask. So the parents should be very forthcoming and telling is there. So we make it a point to ask proactively that any skin birthmark. We always ask and see, because many times it's the Mongolian blue spots which are there, which are innocuous and which go away, which
Yeah.
parent think everything. So I think that is important from parents' point of view. And from when you have these and I think we are teaching in the to the doctors. So even in the periphery, pediatrician would know that more number of for the most number of capillary macules are going to having you have to follow up closely. So and that situation they can do. And I understand that you may feel that in the periphery I mean, they can see, and you have to just examine, and you may just need to refer for an ophtha thing to get the mac, that also, it doesn't have to come to the the tertiary. Even at the secondary level, you can see an ophthalmic examination. So basically, firstly is important to make them understand that the birthmarks may not be only innocuous, may have some associations. So parents also see, doctors also see, and then they have to see what are the associate things which can happen. Like even in tuberous sclerosis, different things come up at different ages. Like in tuberous sclerosis, rhabdomyomas of heart, which may be there at newborn, which will regress. Others progress, that regresses. But here, everything we are seeing is progressing. So unless we monitor, surveillance will have to be done. Clinical surveillance can be in the peripheral level, yes. And everybody does not need a urologist and a gastro person. Those are rare things. Mostly are going to be only in few. And if you may get the the optic pathway will obviously have to be also seen. So you'll need an ophtha person, yes, on there. And access to CT and all, and CT is there for periphery, right? MRI may be in the main cities, but even in smaller cities also CT is there. And I think MRI is also now going into many places. Yeah.
So there are a couple of questions from Dr. Arun Kumar Singh. So first question is, what is the life expectancy of a person with NF1? And the second question is, if treatment is started, can NF1 be cured?
See, I put it this one slide in which one of the studies had said that life expectancy is reduced by 8 to 21 years. Up to, if you ask me my life expectancy, मुझे पता नहीं कल भी हूँ कि नहीं. So, but that was there that it's reduced by 8 to 21 years. So that is what it is. That was my answer. I think it was in one of the slides as well.
Yeah.
And the other one was, one second,
So
I'll
is it
just open
curable?
the chat.
Yeah, is it curable?
See, yeah. You curable is that you forget about it. The point is those tumorous things have come up. So they are not going anywhere, right? So saying curable is not okay. So we better to say in these chronic multisystemic conditions with the genetic basis, we should like to tell them that they are treatable. They are treatable because if, like as I mentioned to you, for the optic pathway, gliomas, mostly you will need to only follow up. Only if they are going into they are compromising in the canal region, or if you're getting the vision area going, then you will have problem. So basically, we will have to follow them up and understand. So that is something important. And whatever is happening, you're following up. And if any issue is coming, you're treating them. So, curable word meaning that you have treated the thing which has come up and you will forget about it, which is not going to happen in the case. So technically speaking, you can't call it curable, but it is treatable. And you
So
don't need to do anything for the neurofibromatosis, and if it's just innocuously placed, so you'll have to just monitor and then individualize the treatment.
One very fundamental question, when we say neurofibromas and then we say plexiform, so what is plexiform? What is
As I showed you, no, I just showed you one of the slides. I can show again. I can just show again the slide. It'll be easier to understand from the picture. 1 second. I have to share now. 1 second. It'll be easier by the picture. Yeah, you can see. See, I mentioned that. See, so this one, there is this common one which is soft, fleshy, either sessile means without a stalk or pedunculated with a stalk, right? And they will just before or during. But this one are basically, this is an overgrowth. You can see it's an overgrowth of the skin and soft tissue, which is also typically flex, right? So this is the flexing one. And you can also have the nodular discrete ones also, which are the firm rubbery, but these are not that common, I have seen these more than these, but maybe that's going to dermatology more. So I should not be saying that. This one, so this we have seen really bad. I've seen whole arms like this, So this is basically our overgrowth of the skin and soft tissue of particular part. Like this is the face, which is vastly. I have seen of whole arms, whole limb, whole right upper limb, like even the lower limb, like that. So which is there. And that is how these look like.
okay?
I can retain the slides because in case I need to use any slide, I won't keep sharing and removing. Yeah, please.
So there's one particular question from Mr. Naveen Kumar, whose son is suffering from NF1 and is under chemo for low-grade optical glioma. He has a tumor in the head and neck. What more can be done? He's 5 years old.
Yeah, I think you'll have to keep treating and following. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, whatever problem comes, you treat it acutely and keep monitoring it. That's what. Because if this has come, does not mean anything else won't come, and it should settle. And vision should be okay until unless the chiasma or the rectochiasmic thing has involved. But it doesn't mean that any other problem will not happen. Like if you remember, we had seen the malignancies. We had seen there were 56 malignancies in 53 children when we were seeing those. So that means 3 of them had 2, or I don't know, maybe one could have had 3 also. I did not see the breakup in the table. So I mean so multiple can happen, technically, theoretically speaking. So what you can do is you can just, you'll have to be under, don't have to be under constant fear, but under constant surveillance. You can't live your life in fear. But even also other things, proactively, the neurodevelopmental part also has to be proactively screened for, which gets commonly missed. So it is not that you were just saying, okay, for technically, you've done a study, IQ is 5 to 10 low. No, it doesn't matter. So you just see if you screen if the child is understanding or not. If there's hyperactivity in 50%, you may like to do behavior intervention on the stream. You may have 12 to 26% may develop, may have autistic features. So if you have to do your behavior intervention for that, so you have to screen not only for the systemic features, but also the neurodevelopmental features as well for an optimized outcome. So I think your screening and follow-up should include the neurodevelopmental aspect also. Unfortunately, having one problem doesn't make your child immune to anything else. That can occur multiply. So you need to look at holistically.
Okay. You mentioned a lot of treatments, including ones that are in the pipeline. Are all of these available in India? And how can patients access these treatments?
See that the 2025 one, I just was it's not available in India. That one which is just come up, which I wanted to tell that many of those similar pathways, but Selumetinib is available in India, yes, and that is being given in India. I am trying to procure for three of my patients. Have not started as yet, but I know my colleagues who have already started giving. But and they do not have too much of toxicity, but the cost is a problem. And this regarding Mirdametinib, which was just FDA approved in February, it was just for from an academic exercise. I mentioned it to you because what is something new coming up? Yeah.
So drugs still have to be made available for the general population. So the Cosulimumab is available for out of pocket, but not in the government as yet, right?
Yeah, it is. It is being worked out. Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's been submitted. Na? The
That's right.
proposal's been submitted. Yeah, yeah. It depends on the government of India's policies and all. But right now, yes, whatever my colleagues have given, they have given an out of pocket. Yeah.
Yeah, there are a lot of patients asking questions. I think what I will do is to ask them for maybe an appointment with your team so that they can be evaluated, because it's difficult to answer based on one question. So,
Specific, yeah. Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
Patient specific, yeah. You can, if anybody wants anything, they can, I think, you know what, Riya, you can have their parents' mobile number and the age of the child, then my PA can, over a period of time, call
yeah.
them and give appointments. Yeah, yeah, definitely.
Ah,
Individual, any, but yeah, yes, but this question, yes, what for Nisha, Dr. Moini said, yes. Yeah, when you have operated and still it is there, yeah, Selumetinib is there for that only. Those either inoperable or those who are recurring after that. That is what, yeah, yeah.
So,
Because even
Dr.
I have a patient.
One
Yes,
of the
sorry, I also,
Yeah,
yeah, please.
one of the things that patients face is body dysformism and extreme stigma because of that. Um, what can be done to address that? Because I know from international patient associations that one of the things that they face is, they are not accepted into schools, not accepted into workplaces because of how they look. Do we have any programs to address this in India?
I think, it's very important to teach uh, parents coping strategies and trying to make them understand and trying to make them accept and not fight within them their own thoughts about it, because uh, for any of these chronic debilitating conditions, it's a similar principle. What happens is that, I mean, and it is devastating for the family to understand, but the only thing is also that there are certain cosmetic things, but like for Flexibom, how much can you do? Only there are many things are there. Like even for others, you may do certain things for cosmetic. Yes, they are possible. But there are yeah, the plastic surgeons do help out in the situation, and the derma people and all that they are doing for many of the neuroectodermatosis. I'm not talking only of NF. I'm just talking about generally because they look uh, some of them will have some vascular things, but I think it's important to uh, appreciate the life and which each has, and have to understand that nobody's glass is full, and every life has equal right to dignified life, every right to dignified life in the society like anyone has. So we have to understand that, and these small things will have to be destigmatization has to take place, and first the parents have to learn to accept the child and not feel ashamed of it or feel bad about it or feel guilty about it first. Second, yes, the community has to understand that one, it's you have to accept all the challenges which any child has got, and not not demean, and you accept it, so that if the I'll tell you what the main thing is. There is a medical condition anybody has.
Right.
When does it become a disability? Becomes a disability only because if the medical condition worsens or your environment is not good. Your environment consists of both the physical thing, like if you need a wheelchair, you need to see the visual aids, you have the hearing aids, whatever, plus the attitude of people around you. The
Right.
attitude of people around you can make or break you. Can you make a person who has a, strength? So your child will have strength if you have strength and you've accepted it and don't feel bad about it first. So you feel happy with whatever it is and you do the maximum treatment, what is possible and available. And other thing is everybody else has, they feel there is I feel that mostly people feel they have a not me phenomena. They don't understand while I'm driving back home, I may have an accident, I may go on a wheelchair, I may be comatose, I may develop Alzheimer, I may develop dementia, I may need support from others, right? People think
Yes.
it's not me. So your compassion, your humanism has to be there.
Yeah.
It is just that today I may not have a problem. I do have. I had a stupid, silly surgery for this, but I'm just saying, and this small thing pained like crazy, and I mean, just saying that. I mean, the person may not have any problem that time, but any time it can have. So one has to value life, yours, and give respect yourself and respect others. And if you don't respect yourself and your child, others won't. So first you accept, and it's not your fault. And it's
Yeah.
not an Amazon parcel that you can ask Amazon to return. It is
Right.
not. It is our own part of our body who has been given to us like that. We can't fight with it, right?
Yeah.
But only thing is learn to accept first yourself, because I'll tell you, I hardly see, I don't think how many people have seen in malls, in weddings, in birthdays, children with any medical issues or neurodevelopment disorders or on wheelchair, on autism, or anything. Have you seen? I don't
Very
know how
rare.
many have seen.
Very
So,
rare.
so don't they have the right to go on all the places? So first we should start taking ourselves first. Let the others say no.
Yeah.
Let the others misbehave, you ignore them. And others have also to understand. So I think it is very important. And I earlier was telling that others should think, but before that, then I realized that first the parents have also to have the confidence to take along,
That is
that
true.
situation.
Yeah.
And there
So
is a limit to whatever we can do. We'll do it together and everything should be done. And many people have asked for scoliosis and all the specific things. See, one thing is there, one main thing. There are different things which come at different ages. You have to do a surveillance and proactively look for them. When they come, then you have to look after that to the specialist. So your 80% curb angle or whatever right now answering won't make any difference. So it's just that even the neurodevelopment, you don't have any blood test for that. You have to show to a doctor who has to see and examine, and some psychological tests may be required. So I was just answering the questions. So basically, you will have to need a close surveillance. So you have to know what all problems are there, and they have to be just screened for and treatment given for them, and so that the child's life is, maximize the child's potential, minimize the trouble of the pain, and minimize any deformity or any disability or this, and try to let the child live with a dignified life. And I think the dignity word is important, and it's nobody's doing you a favor by giving dignity. It is everybody's birthright.
there's one very interesting question from Philippines asking how can they reach out because for the this kind of treatments in other countries.
I think in that situation you should go to your specialist there, and then you tell them that they should reach out, and they will.
Hmm.
They will reach out, because suppose like I'll tell you, there's certain conditions which come, which I know, so gene therapies are being done in the West somewhere for some rare things, which are still in experimental. So then I also try to find out whether anybody is taking patients in something, or even in the trial, or they're accepting international patients or something, then you send you try to find out for your own patients. So if you go to your own country, and they will find out for you, and they may refer to you, they may write a mail to wherever it's best for you, people from your country to go, they will do it. I think best is to talk to your when you're the specialist which you go, and you ask. There's nothing. You should ask straightforward. Every child's parents have right equal, full right to ask for, anybody's second opinion or wherever it is available. Please ask. It's your right, and it's the duty of whoever it is. There's so many. I mean, like, it's very clear. So that's the best way out. Rather than I'm telling write a mail to me. No. The best way is because if the clinician is seeing, we'll be able to connect with all of us. Yes, but in case you have problem through Dr. Ratna, you can contact us. I can guide you to people in Philippines. My friends there, I can send you to them. But the
Uh,
best way for generically is that they go to their specialist and tell them the required.
Also, is there any sharing of data on efficacy of this particular drug between countries? Meaning clinicians in India talking to clinicians of other countries. I think that's the question she was asking because she's from the Philippines Rare Disease Organization.
Okay, I do think one of my colleagues, Dr. Vineet Bhushan Gupta, did go to Bangkok recently. They shared their data. Another of my students, Raju, Dr. K. Vaikanta Ragaju from Bangalore, was supposed to go, but ultimately he didn't go because of visa problems. So they did share. So I think I really do not. I think that one was sponsored by probably AstraZeneca. So they were having people were there from the Asian Oceanian region and discussing the thing. So they are discussed. So in the Asian Oceanian region, they were discussing. So that means it's being discussed. So that was a platform. I don't know where the proceeds from that platform going to go. Dr. Ratna may find out from. I suppose you also went there, right?
No, I didn't. So, but I will try to.
Acha.
This is an
Yeah,
interesting
yeah, you
question.
can.
There's another
They
question.
did, sir.
Is the
Yeah.
treatment with Cosiligo lifelong or is it given episodic?
See, I mean, it is supposed to be so-called lifelong, but it's not written in the pack insert or something, but it's logically, it should be given for long. But the only thing, it is not, it's because of expensive medications, you may not end up being giving long. So we have also been trying to look for data to see that if you give for maybe 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, or whatever years, and because see, I'll tell you the date, it was showing that it took around 20, I think it was taking around how many cycles. I'll just tell you after for the response. I think for the getting response, the median time to best response was after
24.
16 cycles. Yeah,
Yeah.
so that was, and and so it's a given the part, and drugs are given on a continuous schedule 28 days. So so they had best response was after 16 cycles. So that was in one of the studies which I had shown. So even if you see, if so we are still looking for that answer, that if you stop it, which is very, because it's very unlikely that in resource constrained countries we may be able to give lifelong. So if we
Right.
stop it, we should not, there should not be a rebound. So that is
Right.
a worry. So that is a question we still don't have an answer to. We're trying to look at literature, and we have asked also, so trying to see that, ask for data, like friend from Philippines was asking for data from other countries, that even if it's not published, even if the data we have, this question I have raised myself, flagged that what is the minimum time you'd like to give? So we have that thing about that 16 cycles I told you. So, but then that was the best response, but that doesn't mean you stop it. So that means another 16 you like to give. So whether, even if you, for how much can you give minimum? And the only thing is whether if you stop, whether what decrease in size you got will not go rebound. That is what was important. But common sense says that it's not going, some increase will continue. Common sense says because it should continue, but it should not be a rebound. But that's what we're asking. So this is still a $1 million question, actually.
We need more scientific data to be able to establish this. And
Yeah, I've
it's
requested that they should give us this data. Even if it's not published, they can quote it and give it from those who have been getting that. They must have stopped in real world scenario. So they must have stopped. So after stopping, there was a rebound, or like that. So that's.
Thank you, ma'am. I think we can go on for another hour if we keep talking, but thank you so much for your time. I know it's busy day for you. We've
you.
just started on this journey, so we will be reaching out to you more and more. And as I mentioned before, we do a lot of work with Rare Disease International, which has membership across the region. So probably there will be questions from other patient groups who are there in the region as well. And as AIIMS is one of the premier institutes for research as well as for treatment, we will be reaching out to you for questions that are coming from our patient groups and patient, organizations. So thank you so much.
Sure. Dr. Ratna, one last question which I was seeing was they were asking how did they avail from government sources? Yes, you do go to the center of excellences which are near your place and they can go through it. But the only thing is that their ceiling right now is 50 lakhs in that. And right now, this NF1 is still under submission to be the included.
Yeah.
So it will take some time, but it should happen. Yeah.
Thank you,
I
ma'am.
don't know, but that whether it happens or not, the government will decide. Matlab, I mean, which should
Process has been.
that will be the way. Process is on. Process is on. But there many patients have submitted. We have also submitted to our AMCOE from our side for our patients. But when the decision comes from the ministry, will
Yes.
things be
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much for your
Thank
time. It was a wonderful discussion. I still have many questions, but I will reach out to you separately. Thank you so much once again.
Thanks. Thank
On behalf of all the participants, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.